Welcome to Sewing Out Loud, the official podcast of ZD Sewing Studio. Here are your hosts, ZD and Mallory.
Sewing Out Loud. Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Mallory Donahue.
And I'm ZD Donahue.
And today we're going to talk about color blocking. And I feel like we have spoken about color blocking before, maybe in like a costuming episode or something.
I'm sure we've spoken about it. It's just, did we do it formally or
We
informally or on the fly or
Yeah, I just don't know if we have done. I don't think
have we addressed it specifically?
I've searched and searched and searched because when I was thinking about doing this podcast episode, I have this framework in my mind around color blocking, and I thought,
Ha ha ha! Framework around color blocking.
oh, is that good? Is that good? But what I thought was, I didn't just think this up. We've talked about this before, haven't we? And anyway.
Well, okay. So, what
Welcome to
number
the-
podcasts would this be in our lifetime
don't
for
know
us?
yet.
I mean, it's.
A million.
I mean, we're over 200, right? Or
Something
at
like
200
that.
or whatever.
Yes,
And we have tried not to repeat a subject.
we have. We've attempted not to. Okay, so the framework that I came up with around color blocking.
I like framework around color blocking.
And there are more ways to do it. I don't want to limit ourselves, but I thought, there are kind of three basic ways, to color block. And one is to just, choose a different color for each pattern piece or for one pattern piece or
You mean planned color blocking?
Yes, planned color
Okay.
where you
All right.
you don't alter the pattern at all.
Well, and I think this is another thing. There is planned color blocking and there is unplanned color
that was
blocking.
not in my framework. Listen to my
Okay.
framework. Okay.
All right.
Where you just do the
Yes.
where you just do the
So you're not
different-
altering
okay.
the pattern or the piece.
And then
Right.
there's the color blocking where you create the fabric ahead of time, sort of.
Mhm. So you're making your own fabric with blocks of color or blocks
Yes.
of fabric.
And then
Yes.
the third would be cutting apart a sewing pattern and reassembling
Right.
it in order to achieve
Well,
your
because
color
you're
blocking goals.
wanting to achieve a specific line
Yes.
somewhere,
Okay.
like a curve around the
So
body
those-
maybe or something.
Those were my three.
Right.
I thought, there's kind of three ways to color block.
Right.
And I thought that seemed really cut and dry. And I'm like, have I talked about this before? It was just jogging this memory for me.
Mhm.
Anyway, so that now I guess there's a fourth. Unplanned color blocking.
there. I've got some more unplanned
All right.
or out of necessity.
Out of necessity. Yes, but those are all I bet I can file those under my categories.
Yes, okay, let's make
Okay.
them subcategories. But
Okay.
what I'm saying is, so like I'm cutting out a rash guard,
Yes.
right? Well, that's not a good example because a lot of my rash guards are color blocked. But I'm cutting out something that has long sleeves, a blouse, a
Yeah.
blazer, or whatever. And I have laid this pattern out 42 times on this fabric, and I can't get the sleeve long enough.
Right.
Which would not be the problem for me usually. But, I need more fabric if I want a long sleeve.
Right.
So I'm going to have to decide, do I want a 3/4 length sleeve? Do I want a longer sleeve? Or do I want to color block that sleeve where it's too short? Or do I want to decide to color block it somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
So that I can have
You
more
have your
fabric.
fabric.
So out of necessity, I
Yeah.
guess this would be that I decide I'm going to have to make some decisions on color blocking if I want to use this fabric for the majority of this garment.
Yeah.
right?
Okay. Well,
But then there's
Sure.
unplanned.
okay.
Yes, I was like going through the serger and I just cut a hole, right, in part of my fabric someplace that was on my pattern piece that was already cut out in part of my
Right.
garment. And this is not a hole I can repair, okay, or make go away or whatever. Or, maybe I could put a patch on it, but it's like not in a good place to put a patch because I don't want it like, in the middle of my butt or something, right? So I'm going to go, okay, maybe I'm going to have to chop this off and add a different piece of fabric because I used up all the fabric initially.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So just using different fabric. SOS
Mhm.
color blocking.
Right.
All right. But let's talk about my framework that I made up.
If Mallory and I prepared for this, we might have this
I
all
did
set up, but-
prepare for it, and then
what-
you're
what-
like,
what
and then
we-
you-
okay, so we do a podcast together, but we don't prepare for it together.
I wouldn't say that we
Okay.
never prepare for it. That's not always
No, you're
true.
true. There's never
But
there's
we've
never
been
a never and never and always.
we've been
Yeah.
preparing for every podcast for 25
You know,
years.
yes,
Since I began
since
sewing.
you were in utero, I
No,
have been preparing.
I found over in my closet the first sewing project that I ever did. Okay, we'll talk about that later. And guys, it's not sewn up, so I have a 25-year-old UFO over there in the closet. We'll talk about that later. All right, color blocking. So I would say let's just talk about the simplest form of color
yes.
blocking, where, like your rash guards.
Right.
Okay, where it's a princess seam raglan.
Right.
So you already have, I mean, how many pattern pieces is that? 3 across the front.
Right.
Okay. So, and then
I mean,
your 2 sleeves.
well, if you take a simple raglan shirt of any kind, right?
Right.
What is a baseball shirt?
baseball
It's color
shirt's
blocked.
color blocked. Yeah.
So this, and that's common in I make my night shirts like that often because I'm using scraps.
And who knows if you're ready to go paddleboarding or you're ready to go to sleep or what you're about
Actually, I
to
got
do.
told that the other
Yes,
day.
I know.
About
People like that joke.
about twice a month, my husband does say to me, "Are those your clothes?"
No.
Or is that your clothes? Or are you dressed? Or I can't tell what you have on anymore.
You've mentioned
Yeah,
that in a
I know.
podcast before, and people quote it. They
It is
they
funny.
think it's funny.
It
Yeah.
is funny.
I'm glad somebody thinks it's
And
funny. No.
some of those fabrics cross over. So what can you say? I mean, hey, I'm surprised he notices I have on anything,
There you
or
go.
that anything even crosses over.
Anything.
Right. So yeah. So you look at a baseball shirt, and that's like almost the mother of color blocking,
Yeah,
right?
kind of
The sleeves are one color.
an iconic.
And usually the neckband is the color of the sleeves, and then
Uh-huh.
the body of the shirt, the front and the back are the same color.
Yeah, that's kind of an iconic example of color blocking.
Right.
And then you can use color blocking. So personally, I like to color block to some when I think about like a princess line, garment like that. I like to color block to give myself a bit of a waist. I'm often trying to minimize sort of that middle area of my body and maximize the top
Right.
because
So
I have a smaller bust.
you're looking for an optical illusion.
Yeah, so I kind of like to do that, every once in a while. So I will use a lighter color on the center panel of a
Right.
princess line, dress or
Mhm.
rash guard or swimsuit, leotard thing like that. And then use darker colors on the side. And so it can give you that illusion of having that, slimmer figure.
And I think that's what a baseball shirt does.
Yeah.
Because you aren't the same color all the way across.
Uh-huh.
Your arms look like they're separate.
Right. So you
Right.
don't so it blocks that out.
Right. It doesn't give you the width of your arms and your body. It gives you just the width of your
Right.
body.
You're not white all the way across. You're white with black sleeves,
Right.
with red sleeves or something. And we can talk about, I think we have done a podcast about choosing fabrics and whatnot. But,
Mhm.
I always think of that lighter in the middle and darker on the outside. But then occasionally I'll come up with a different fabric combination. And maybe it's a combination of patterns.
Right.
And it still is pleasing to the eye to
Right.
me. So I don't think there are any like super hard and fast rules there, but I like to
No.
read about them to give myself some ideas of things to try.
Right. Now, I have made like the dark dress with just the front panel being the lighter color because then I'm not sitting on the light color.
Oh, smart.
Yeah. So
Very
from
smart.
the back, I have basically a solid dress, even though it's got the princess
Yeah, so
sleeves.
you keep that lighter color on
Right.
the front.
And the light panel is just that front one.
Mhm.
And I
Oh.
remember doing that actually, I did that in junior high. And then I put the monogram on the light color that matched the dark color. There was
Right.
the monogram was like on my chest. Yeah.
Well,
I was so innovative.
And there are a few different pieces of advice about so sometimes your smallest part of your body is at your natural waist, but then
Or
sometimes
right above it sometimes.
yeah, right above it or even right under the bust.
Right.
So if you're trying to create some kind of optical illusion, if you are just going to not alter a pattern, not applique anything,
Right.
not do anything crazy like that, you want to look at the design lines of the pattern as it comes to you.
Right.
Okay? So is it an empire waist
So
dress?
it might
You know?
already be what we call complementary or what you choose.
Yes.
Already you've got the lines there.
Right.
Right.
So if you're wanting to go a little easy on yourself and
Right.
you say, oh, I'd like it to be lighter on my bust and then darker empire waist down,
Right.
pick yourself an empire waist dress pattern. And then the color blocking, once you get the fit down after you've
Right.
muslined it out and everything, the color blocking will just kind of be a secondary thing for you, so you don't have to worry about that so much. When you are color blocking, we don't always get the luxury as home stitchers to have like the same weight fabrics going
Yeah, sometimes it'll be a
together.
little different.
Yeah.
Or, texture might be different. And that's okay too. Sometimes that's great.
Yeah,
if
sometimes
texture's
that's a lot of
different.
fun. So you might in your color blocking journey, maybe the top is white lace with a white underlay and that bottom half is black,
Mhm.
or something. When you go into a store, I remember one time going on this kind of big shopping trip in high school, and I was with Hillary, with my sister, and I went to New York and Company, and I bought some dresses, and I bought some shorts and things like that, and some of the pieces were made out of the same fabrics, or a different color version of the same
Right,
fabric.
I call them sister fabrics.
Yes.
Yes.
So New York
Brother
and
fabrics,
Company
sister fabrics.
had purchased
Right.
all this fabric to make this
Right.
stuff out of. And so since they were the same weight, they could kind of color block and coordinate and everything. But we don't always have that where we've got
No.
like the same weight Ponte
Right.
or the same weight
Well,
swimwear
And the other thing
fabric,
about that
something.
in industry is if you have exactly the same weight fabric when you make a size,
Yeah.
okay, so all those size, 14 pants
hmm
will fit exactly the
No,
same.
you have to do
Right.
that. They have to do that for, yes,
Right.
standardization. No, you're totally right. But I would say, you're going to need to test out your seams.
Mm-hmm.
It may depend, like if you're sewing stretchy fabrics together, you may want to top stitch seams or not, depending on how they
Also,
come out
what color you're going to use
in your
in
threads,
in your seaming. Usually you can use either color,
sure.
but sometimes it will make a difference.
Yeah, sometimes you want to
Yeah.
like,
Sometimes
depending,
you're like, maybe I better go with that darker color.
or
Yeah.
or exactly, or
Right.
the lighter color. So
Right.
you will need to,
And you may have to change threads while you're sewing because you're going to sew the white top together and then put the navy or you just said black, I guess.
yeah. So you're gonna,
The dark bottom together. You may be changing threads in a side seam.
yes, and so you may want to think about your order of operations a little bit. Maybe you
Exactly.
want to use all your light
Mhm.
thread first, or depending on
Right.
how many machines you have.
What color zipper are you going to put in?
What? Yes.
Does
all,
it change, midway or
Mhm.
whatever?
No, all that. That's a
That's
really
where
good thing.
invisible zippers came in to be wonderful.
Yes, invisible zippers are awesome for that. So you might be breaking some rules, and you might be looking at the pattern and seeing recommended fabric types.
Right.
Okay, and so maybe you're blending those,
Mhm.
or maybe you're thinking, I'm gonna pop in a knit into this
Right.
woven
Or
recommendation.
the other thing I have found is because I'm so into spandex lately, right? And the
Uh-huh.
knits is the different weights.
Yeah,
So sometimes I'm lining one of them and not the other
there you go.
because I'd like it to be heftier.
Yeah.
That a lot of times it's like the designer printy looking
Sure.
one, and I'm putting it on a heftier solid. So I will line it.
Yeah, so maybe one
Right.
part of your color blocking is lined,
Right.
another part is not. Maybe you've got that lace overlay lined on the bodice and not on the sleeves.
Right.
So
I do that a lot.
Yeah.
Don't line the sleeves. Yeah.
you may have to experiment seaming the different combinations, the different
Right,
recipes
right.
together. So you might want to experiment with that before you go ahead and do your final project.
Right.
Okay, so keep that in mind.
Test, test, test.
You're going to have to keep that in mind through all of the color blocking, sort of frameworks that we go
Right.
through here. But I just figured we'd start out with that easy one where maybe you're going to do, just the sleeves different and the princess seams. And this is something where I think that line drawing on the pattern can be really helpful for you to just trace it out and just do even value sketches where you're
Right.
doing black, white, and gray. And you're like,
Right.
okay, I want my mid-tone here. I want my
Right.
dark here. I want my light here. Or draw in a pattern. If you're like, I'm going to put a plaid, in here, that is where that can be nice. Even if you're not drawing it necessarily on like a croquis
Right.
But if you're just using the line drawing from the pattern, I really like that. And I did that for my Kelly Anorak that I got this love-hate relationship with. you
It's
know,
7 years old and not
it's
finished,
not,
whatever.
no, it's not 7 years old.
Oh, it's only 5.
No,
Zelda's
no,
only
no.
5.
Yeah. Is it? I don't even know
Didn't
if
you
it's
start
that
it
old.
before she was
Anyway,
born?
whatever. No, it was before Jerome was born, so it's
Oh.
not that old.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So anyway, yeah, you might want to sort of, do a little bit of sketching and planning. And if you are following
And you
along,
need to sketch and plan.
Yes.
And yes, you can overdo color blocking. I mean, that's an
Sure.
opinion.
Yeah,
That's an
It
opinion.
is, but yeah.
But I don't want you to be disappointed when you go, oh my God, what was I thinking? I've got this floral and this plaid and this stripe and this and this is and it doesn't work.
And I look
you
like
know.
a crazy quilt on
Because
legs.
another famous color blocking that you will see is a clown costume.
Yeah, there you go.
Very
Harlequin
famous.
kind of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
I mean, I remember when you were little, we had a clown costume that everyone wore. And I made it out of 2 different corduroys.
One leg was this and one leg was that.
Right,
Yeah,
like
there you
well, it
go.
was the 4 panels.
Mhm.
And they alternated.
Sure.
And then the collar was a different color.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you
And then it had pom poms down the front. Yeah.
and like you said, it's an opinion because I have seen some people pull off certain things that I like on them and I don't like on me.
I guess what I'm thinking about is like in the quilting community too. What I see is like, especially because they make collections.
Yes.
And they say these all go together.
Unity collection.
It doesn't mean you use them all at the
You don't have
same
to use them
time.
all in
You
the
don't
same
have to.
thing.
I mean, but I have seen quilts that I'm like, I can't even see what's going on here because my eyes are like buzzing across
Okay,
trying to.
let me go on a little
Yeah.
tangent about value.
Yes.
Okay, there's a quilter. Her name is Blair. I don't know if she goes. I'm friends with her on Facebook, so I don't know how she goes professionally, but on Facebook, her name is Blair Kathy Stalker. Stalker. Stocker. And
Not stalker.
no,
but
yeah, I was like,
stalker,
that
yeah.
sounds wrong.
Like stock. Yeah.
And I can't. The name of her quilt books, I can't remember what they are, but she sells a product called the Ruby Ruler.
Oh, okay. Yes, that you lay down on things.
No,
Yeah.
you look.
You look through
Okay,
it.
well, I
Right.
think, yeah, you can lay it down on things,
Yeah.
but it is, and this is not unfamiliar to me coming
Right.
from like an art school background.
This is very art.
It's very
oriented,
very
yes.
common in the visual arts, but
Yeah.
you look through a plastic
Rose colored.
yes,
Yes.
red thing
Filter.
filter. And so she's got this acrylic red ruler. And what it does is it helps you to determine the value independent of the hue.
Now, what is the value?
Yeah, I will.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So, yeah, I will talk about it. So, the value is the darkness or lightness of a color.
I call it the concentration. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Mhm.
Then the hue is the color. So, it's
Right.
like it's blue, it's red, it's pink, it's green. That's the hue. The value is it's dark red. It's dark blue or it's light blue,
Right.
and within the values, you have tints, which is where you add light to, or where you add the dark, you make the color darker. No. Tints are lighter, shades are darker.
Right.
Gosh. Okay. I'm seeing.
Think shade, you pull it down and you make it dark. That's how I think of
I'm
it.
seeing the textbook in my mind.
Yeah.
Okay. So that she does these patchy quilts.
Right.
Where she's using all these different colors, but they end up making a lot of visual sense.
Yes.
Because she has orchestrated her design based on value
Right.
and not just hue. So you can still see if she's made a quilt that's sort of made up these diamond shapes, you don't lose the diamond shape because she has orchestrated them based on value,
Right.
even though it's many, many, many different colors.
Right.
So it's called like Quilt Wise or something. Her
Well,
book.
and
Wise
yeah,
Craft.
I mean, and that concept's been around for a long
Yes,
time.
yes.
But and a lot of you that quilt now, there's some people that don't need this tool. Okay,
Yeah.
they have sort
They
of an
have the
affinity,
eye, yeah.
to do this or whatever. Some people get really scared of it, so you have to come from where you're coming from.
No, and I'll tell you, I screw it up sometimes. So I like these tools.
Right.
Because sometimes I'll see something, I'm like, oh, yeah, I'll put those together. And I'm like, oh, I kind of wish I would have flipped it. I feel
Right.
like sometimes I want that tool. So it's not like it's a rudimentary tool. Like
Right.
artists still use
Well,
these
and
things
there are
all the
things like
time.
saturation
Uh-huh.
or whatever of a color will stop the eye.
Mhm.
And like a tint makes the eye go, wander away from it or go past it, where there's another color that can stop your
The
eye.
other thing that we're using in sewing that doesn't happen so much in like just the painting world is we're using patterns.
Right,
So we have these prints,
right,
and sometimes I think that can be a little confusing to assess the value of a
exactly.
printed fabric versus a solid color.
Hmm.
So if you really are kind of wondering which one is going to show up lighter, if you have a red piece of glass
Right.
or you have a red, if you got 3D glasses or something like that, or you
I
can.
think those types of things are available
Oh
any
yeah,
place.
yeah.
Yeah.
You can get them in an art store, or if you have the Ruby ruler, you can lay your fabrics out and you can look at them through this ruler, and it's going to help you. Actually, I'm looking at these tool containers we have that
Oh,
are
yeah.
red
And
plastic.
they are.
Yeah,
Right.
so I could even use that in a pinch, if I had to. But what that does is it filters out all the other
Right.
colors, and it lets you just see the value. So that can be
Right.
helpful when you're colorblind.
And then there is.
Well,
go
oh,
ahead.
well, I was going to take a break.
Okay.
Is this a
I,
good break?
I
Are we going
will.
to add something to that
I
part of
will.
it?
I will write down what I'm
That
going to
part
do.
of the framework.
Yes, I'm going to write down what we're going to do so I can remember when we come back. Because
Okay,
we're going to be gone for such a
we'll
long
be right
time.
back. ZD, what's your favorite way to measure yourself?
With my Easy Check tape measure.
So tell me a little bit about this.
It's the only way to measure myself, I think.
Why is it so magical?
Well, because there's a slide on it.
Uh-huh.
You actually snap one end of the tape measure into the back of the slide, and then you fit it to the measurement, and then you can unsnap, and the slide remains on the place that you've measured.
So if you're trying to measure your arm
Right.
or your underbust,
Right.
or your
Or your
thigh,
head.
or your head. Oh yeah, the head,
Right.
definitely.
Well, and measuring yourself is one thing, but even measuring somebody else, what it does is it marks the spot, basically, where the measurement is. And so and this happens to you, that you're measuring somebody and they start talking to you and you're like, was that 21 or 23? Oh my gosh. And
Right.
where with this, the slide has marked it.
I also have heard feedback from customers who say, I am sending this to my daughter, or, so that she can measure my grandchildren and
That's
it will
right.
be accurate.
Right.
Right?
We've actually had trainers too.
Yep.
That bought these, for their customers, or they themselves use it for their customers, or it was a male trainer and a female client. He
Right.
didn't have to put his hands on the person
Right.
or whatever.
Also, this tape measure, when you use it with a snap, it's impossible to work from the wrong side.
That's the other thing.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you can't measure from the 60 end. You have to measure from the
zero-
one end,
from the
zero
zero.
end.
Yes.
Right, right. And I said 60, but it also has the millimeters on the other side too. So
Yeah.
you've got
You have imperial and you have metric.
metric, right.
And so the Easy Check tape measure makes it very simple when you are trying to measure yourself, and you just don't want to be fumbling around.
Well, and I think, the thing is, don't order one, because if somebody sees it, a husband or
Right.
a daughter or just a friend, I mean, honestly, at Christmas time, I would put this like in almost everybody's stocking stuffer. And I think it's a great thing to like send away to college with people, things like that, where
Fabulous,
you want
yeah.
something measured.
Well, if you're interested in your own Easy Check tape measure, you can see a video on how it works at sewhere.com/tape measure, and you can check it out for yourself. Sewing out loud. And we're back. Okay, Mom, what'd you write down?
Well, I want to talk about a pattern or let's say a print or a woven.
I know the word
the-
pattern is
I know the pattern can,
confusing.
when you say pattern, it can get, so not every fabric is solid.
Right.
Okay. And then you get there's another challenge there, because if you're mixing prints, let's call them prints.
Yeah.
Okay. Which could mean it could be a stripe too, or a check or a gingham or whatever. But anyway, if you're mixing those, they need to be of different sizes. You don't want a gingham check, say, that is sort of got a calico print, the flowers are the same size, then your eye doesn't know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there's a time when you want to do
It
that,
might
but I
happen.
can see
It
what
might happen.
playing with the sizes is very important. Okay, but let's go on to talk
Yeah.
about other types of color blocking because we have done a podcast about mixing prints and
Right.
stuff, and you brought up that size difference and everything, and
Right.
it can make a huge difference. Okay, so let's talk about if you are going to cut up a pattern. Let's pretend.
Ooh, yeah, you got to be real careful here,
Gotta
everybody.
be real careful. Let's pretend that you have your princess line button-up shirt.
And this is where, unfortunately, Team Trace is going to come in. It has to.
Not unfortunately, proudly,
Proudly,
Team Trace is coming in,
boldly, and proudly.
saving the day. Team
You've
Trace is
got
where it's
to
at.
trace.
Got to trace.
If you cut up your original pattern, I want you to keep your original pattern. Okay?
I mean, we always want you to.
So whatever pattern, you've decided now it fits you and everything or whatever, and that piece, it needs to stay intact.
I would, yes.
Okay?
Because guess what? You might change your mind.
Well, not only that, because after you cut your pattern pieces, you're going to lay them back on there
Right.
to make sure they
Oh.
are correct.
Okay, well, don't skip ahead. Don't spoil the
okay.
fun.
So I have, what do I have? Do I have
Well, this
here?
is what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
This is where if you have a garment like a princess line, a button-up shirt that has like a button placket and
Yeah.
stuff. To me, this garment has lots of like vertical seams on
Yes.
it. Okay,
Uh-huh.
so like 4 front pieces. Maybe there's a placket up front or a yoke or something, and there's the button placket.
Right.
And then the most challenging way to color block that, or one of the more challenging ways, would be to then put in
A
horizontal break here.
Mhm.
And
That wasn't already in the
that
pattern.
wasn't already there. Or a diagonal one,
The
which
diagonal.
maybe
Mhm.
just don't do that, okay?
She's getting too complicated.
Don't do that.
I
No.
mean, I'm saying, wait, even if we just take a sheath
Okay.
that has princess seams,
Sure.
okay?
No, I was trying to make
Get
it really complicated.
Yeah, get all those plackets and all that out of there.
But, what if you have one? You have so many.
Don't do that the
Hank,
first time.
Don't do the diagonal thing, okay? That for sure. Don't
Well,
do
you
that.
can't. I mean, you can do a curve.
Not your
There's-
first time,
right.
okay?
But what you're going to do is you're going to trace.
Yeah.
So you have to have 2 masters at this point,
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
And then you're going to draw a line someplace
Yes.
where you decide you want there to be a seam,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. You can cut that apart if you
Mhm.
want and then add seam allowance.
Right.
Or you can again trace on top of that and add a seam. So whatever your seam allowance is going to be has to be added to that.
Yes. So, and here's the deal. If you want this line to be like, picture our sheath or our button-up shirt or
Right.
whatever, let's pretend you just want to color block it right at the waist. Or okay,
Right.
just one straight line. You need to have that master pattern, and you have to mark where the waist is
That's
if
right.
you want this color blocking, to line up
Mm-hmm.
properly. Now, this might, if you are just going to do this straight line, this might be a better candidate for the make your fabric first.
Right. You
Okay.
can make your the other thing that I like to do is, so I've made my copy, I've made my line, and I hold a pattern up to me in the mirror.
Yeah,
Now, it's not going to be absolutely exact,
right.
okay? But I'm going to find out if I'm, cutting
Way
my
high or way low.
breast in two,
Yeah.
or am I going between them, around them? Am I at my waist? Am I at my hip? Where, it will give you some idea. And I usually have measured this anyway before I do it too.
Right.
But it gives me an idea of where that's going to lay.
So another way to do this, if you want to do something real crazy, okay, and you really want to know if it's going to complement your body, is you make a muslin out of muslin.
Right.
You wear it, and you take a permanent marker.
Take a magic marker yourself.
Or whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
Whatever you're going to do.
Sharpie, whatever.
And you actually draw
Right.
these design lines
Well,
onto the dress.
and I will draw them with a pencil first.
Yeah.
And then go, that's
Oh,
going to have to
change
go up 2
this.
inches higher. I bring it up 2 inches higher with the pencil. Then I lay it down and draw it.
Yeah, you may
with
have
the-
seen. So
right.
I feel like I remember a picture of this technique kind of going around on Facebook
Right.
before, and so it was looking like this really curvy,
Right.
crazy line of that was going around this princess line
Right.
sheath dress,
Right.
So if you color that in, you can really get a
Well,
very
and the other
accurate
thing too
idea.
is you're drawing these lines and they're, two-dimensional. And when you get them on the body,
Uh-huh.
it starts
It's
to curve. It
really starts
becomes
to be different.
three-dimensional. So it's, where depending on where you're doing it, it's wrapping around the body.
So whether or not whatever kind of line you make, if it's straight, if it's curved, if you're doing it on your pattern, which you've traced, or if you're doing it on this muslin garment that you are then designing, a little more haute couture kind of thing, you're going to need to then trace on that muslin, trace on that master, or
Right.
cut that apart, and you need to add seam allowance. And you need to mark, or I do at least always,
Matching
I mark
points.
some matching
Mhm.
points, some notches.
Right. And
Okay.
so the last thing you're going to do before you cut this out
Uh-huh.
is you take those pattern block pieces that you've made with your seam allowance and you lay them on your master
Oh, that's a good
and
idea.
you make sure they still are the same shape and size. So
Yes.
you're going to overlap them
Uh-huh.
because so when you put that seam allowance on, make sure you also mark where the seam allowance is on.
Right.
So
Stitching
because
line
you're
and
not
seam allowance
butting
line.
right.
Yeah.
Because you're not butting them up
No.
together when you're laying seam line on seam line.
And let's talk about this a little bit. This really helps you to understand sleeves if you ever do anything like this. Or if you are a quilter and you've done like the drunkard's path or
You're
any
making a drunkard's
you're making a
dress.
drunkard's dress. Okay. If you've done something like that, when you have your convex curve
Right.
and you add seam allowance to it, okay, that seam allowance line is greater than
Yes.
your then your stitching line, and then you have your so I said convex, yeah, and then you have your concave line, and you add seam allowance to it, and the seam allowance, the raw edge of the fabric that you cut out, is less than your stitching line. So then when you go to match up your matching points, it's not that you need to ease because your stitching lines should be exactly.
You should have an exact match.
Yes.
Yes.
But you may need to clip.
You probably have to clip your seam
Along
allowance,
your,
especially
curves.
where it's most severe.
Yes, where it's most severe. Like if you do a really weird,
Right.
severe color blocking here and you're piecing it together, you may need to clip. And then really you need to trust those matching points
Mhm.
and do your best to pay attention to that stitching line. Okay. And this is with sleeves. It's like I think people get caught up and they see the seam allowance looks
Right.
very large, especially on a sleeve cap,
Mhm.
right? Because that's I would call that a convex, curve that then a lot of extra can be added
Mhm.
to it in seam allowance land. And then over on your arm side, that's your concave, and it
Right.
gets taken away. So it's like match the stitching lines. Don't worry that the seam allowances don't necessarily, after you've sewn it
Right.
together, need to match up. So
They're not. They
I-
probably won't. Yeah.
this is going to be one of the Zigzag Live broadcasts where I did the curved color blocking
Mhm.
on Stacy's leggings, and this was inspired by a ready-to-wear pair that I
Right.
saw, advertised on Facebook a whole bunch. And so it's like there's a curved line going up her calf.
Right.
So it's the lowest at the inseam, and then it comes up and curves over her calf, like where the outseam would be. And so I did that, and I had to do a few matching lines.
Right.
Now, of course, it was delightful to put together because it's stretchy.
Right. To me, stretches it.
So
Now,
yeah.
the other thing that you may wind up doing if you're working with knits or lycra,
Uh-huh.
this is especially when you see what I would call the gymnastic leotard, where you see
Yeah, like the wavy lines.
you see
across
the wavy
chest or
lines,
something.
so your color blocking almost becomes an applique.
Well, let's move on
Okay.
to that.
Yeah. So I can do this in two ways.
Mhm.
Here's where seam allowances become more arbitrary.
Right.
Okay. So say I just have a different shape on the top.
Right.
Right. Okay. On the chest of my leotard, some sort of wave or dip or something, right? That
Mhm.
I'm going to put on. So I can do this two ways. I can take the bottom of my leotard, right? And I can cut the top above and beyond where any of that line would lay,
Right.
right? And then I would cut that top piece with exactly what that line is, that curve line. Then I have to lay it on my master pattern, everybody,
Make sure
right?
it
To
lines
make
up.
sure
Yeah.
that I've lined my shoulders and my arms, eyes, and all that. Okay. I lay it on there, and then I would applique that top piece by zigzagging, you know, needle on, needle off of that edge,
Right.
right? And then I would go back, turn it over when I was finished, and trim away all of that excess.
When you start to get into super detailed, like thin lines or
Yes.
some very specialized shapes, you need to go into applique
You need,
land.
and I mean, we even do this on wovens.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, there's a very popular sweater pattern that I think is, I don't know if there's an adult version as well, but it's a kid's version. And it's a sweatshirt that is like a paper pieced diamond in the middle.
Yes.
It's really cute.
Right.
However, and oh yeah, so I don't want to like criticize the pattern, but I wouldn't do that for everything. Like if my kid just wanted a heart on their shirt, that's not color blocking.
It's
That's
not worth
applique
it.
time
That's
for me.
applique.
Yeah,
Right,
you know,
right.
if I just need to have, one wavy line on a
Right.
leotard, I'm not going to piece
Right.
it together.
Maybe we can put my sample, like my one Ariel costume that I call it my perfect butt
Yeah.
costume, that it was sort of supposed to represent water,
Well, we talked about this.
and it is. We talked about the whole thing, and it's applique on top of mesh.
Yes, and we've talked about our knit applique technique in one
Right.
of the Zigzag Live broadcasts. That was a really good one. I think
Right.
that was like October.
But that's still
yeah,
color
loved
blocking.
it. Yes.
It's so there's a couple of ways
It's like
to
a blend.
approach.
That when you do those big fields like that, it's a bit
Mine
of
was, that was definitely a
Um,
color.
is a meld.
So the black costume was applique.
uh,
The blue and silver costume was color blocking to me. That's how I would have described it.
I was like applicolor blocking.
Applicolor
blocking.
Applicolor. Applablock.
Because it wasn't.
Applablock.
It wasn't just like you popped on a heart. You were
No.
making the fabric kind of.
Right.
Okay, and then let's bring this to our last.
I like applablock.
No, applicolor
Block
blocking.
Applock.
No, because it's like applique, but
Don't-
it's applicolor blocking.
The color is besides this applicolor block.
Applicolor blocking.
Okay.
You all can weigh in, okay?
Okay,
Tell us
somebody
what you
think up a good word for
Yes,
us.
tell us what you think.
Color applablock.
Co-
Applicolor block.
I'm gonna stick to my guns here, okay? All right. Our last version of this is making the fabric beforehand.
Yes.
Okay, and
Well-
I kind of embarrassed myself
Okay,
on that.
but
I
this
have a story.
And this is one of
Don't whisper.
Okay, this
was
is one of
whispering.
my favorite ways if I want to embroider on something ahead of time
Okay.
too.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a similar thing,
Yeah.
So take a big piece,
Mhm.
right, and cut it in half or whatever. So like if I'm making a shirt and I have a big, huge machine embroidery that I want in the middle of the back,
Yeah.
I don't cut that piece out.
No.
I take a big square and I, embroider on it, and then I cut the piece
I
out.
was just having some kind of dream about this. I'm having big time deja vu about this. Okay, about embroidering on something before you cut it out. I'm serious.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about this.
Because we have the same mind.
Okay, there was a costume that needed to be made for a production. Okay,
Mhm.
that I was somewhat involved in, and it needed to be black and white, like squares.
Right.
Okay, and it was a dance, kind of like a dancey
Right.
costume. And I said to the director, I was like, "Oh, I wouldn't piece that together. I'd get white fabric, I'd applique on some
Right.
black squares,
Right.
onto
Right.
a big piece
Right.
of fabric, and I cut it out." And then they were like, "Oh, well, we've already pieced it
It all
together." And I was like,
together.
"Okay." I was like, I didn't mean to make anybody
Right.
sound. I had a very strong opinion because I thought, "Oh, this is so efficient," but I kind of maybe sounded like a bit of a mean person.
I would say I'm trying to think how many times I've made stripe fabric.
Yes.
And what I do is I have my base fabric.
Yeah.
Now I'm thinking of one right now, and it was candy cane sort of striped. It
Sure.
was white vest with, not chartreuse, but it was pink. It was
Like a hot pink or something.
Yeah, like hot pink sequin
Oh.
stripes.
Yeah.
Right? So I cut my stripes and I appliqued them onto the fabric before I made the vest.
Yeah.
I made my fabric.
And so this is
Now, you don't have to make yards of fabric.
no.
So I cut out, like, say, a rectangle or a
Get an
square or
idea.
something and laid down my vest pieces on it and went, okay, this will work. And then I striped.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think of in this case the Mondrian inspired garments.
Mondrian.
Do you know? You'll know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about. It's the Broadway boogie. So it's all squares and rectangles.
Uh-huh.
I just brought them home from.
I didn't get to see them.
Yeah, but you know what I'm talking about here. You're gonna be like, that's Mondrian.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so it's like the primary colors, color
I
blocked.
made those dresses and grew up in them.
Yeah.
That's what I was making in junior high.
Well, you didn't know what I was talking about. Nuh-uh.
We called them mod.
Okay, well,
We didn't say Mondrian.
it's
We said
inspired
mod.
by the artist,
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, Mondrian. So anyway, what I would do in that case, if you don't know what I'm talking about, Google it. But I would kind of lay out my pattern and be like, okay, I want my big red, here.
It's a type of a window pane.
Right,
And then you take a outline black
right.
to frame your
To frame this framework of color blocking.
Right.
So yeah, I might piece something like that together.
but then I'd applique that black on.
Then I applicate the black outline on. Yeah, I would for sure. Because you don't want to applicate on if it's going to waste a bunch.
Right.
If you're working on a budget,
Right.
if that's important to you, I mean, you can do whatever you want. But,
Right.
if you're going to have like a big white field and a big red field,
Right.
you don't want to be wasting a bunch of fabric
Right,
by,
exactly.
leaving that under there. So you could kind of,
But
plan that
I don't want to
out.
make a stripe because I don't want seam.
Yes, because that would just be ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then, you make that a little bigger than your pattern piece
Right.
because when you sew things together, and you know what that does? It makes it so you're not doing a bunch of really minute math.
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
If you don't want to be going crazy, unless you have a very limited stash of fabric, if you can, say, okay, about this much, and I'll piece it together, and then I'll keep piecing,
Right.
and I'll see where this lands. Then you don't have to be like, I'm going to take away this much seam allowance, and I'm going to do this. I was just watching a YouTube video on how to put cement tile on a shower step.
Mm-hmm.
So they had their shower step, but then they had to put something else over the step before they put the cement tile on it, and they
Right.
had to miter the tile. So he was saying, we got to get down to the millimeter here
Right.
to make sure this works because you kind of have this extra stuff in there. It's not
Right.
just the step you built. And I thought, oh my God, boy, am I glad that I work in fabric. And
I
get-
know. I think all no, I was cutting
Not quite
sheet.
as
I was cutting
rigid.
sheet metal this weekend.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh
You can't
man,
make
if I
any
make a
mistakes.
mistake, yeah,
No. Yep.
no,
Fabric?
and it was made noise when I did it, and
Yeah.
it sparked, and it was yeah,
A lot of pressure.
It wasn't real pliable, and I
No.
had to wear gloves.
No, I was thinking
yeah.
about our backsplash and the
Yeah.
tile, and I'm like, ooh,
Yeah.
and they were
No.
mitering. So do you understand?
What else did I?
it's-
No, I absolutely
it's-
understand what you're saying.
Yeah, so if those of you listening at home, I'm not just talking about going around a corner in a two-dimensional
right.
way.
No, I know you're
I'm talking about going up and over. So they were talking about how it's easy to chip it when it doesn't
Absolutely,
have its
that-
support,
and that then yes.
And then once again, I was like, I'm so glad
I'm
that
trying
I
to-
work in
Yeah,
fabric.
I'm trying to think. There was something else that I was doing recently, and I was like, fabric. No wonder I chose fabric.
I know, it's,
fabric
truly,
is so wonderful. You can do anything with it.
it's kind of forgiving.
yeah, and you can color block it if you have to.
You can baste it together.
right.
You can test it out.
Nobody knows it was a mistake.
Nope.
Yeah.
And you can a little bit of ease in there.
yeah, I know.
And then it's like, make it out of spandex, and it's extra forgiving. Anyway, yeah. So I was just, I want to do cement tile on my backsplash, which will not require that type of mitering,
No.
But I was kind of looking up how to cut it and see if it was
Well,
any different.
unfortunately, you have a really nice wet saw too.
Well, good, because
Yeah.
we'll need it. Anyway,
Mhm.
so that is where you can kind of make your own fabric and always make stuff a little bigger and then
Right,
cut
that
it
can
down.
happen
And then
too.
once again, if I didn't make it clear earlier in the podcast, and if we haven't made it clear throughout the last 4 years of podcasting, test, test, test.
Yes.
And with a color blocked garment, you need to make a muslin first if you're unsure of the fit, because you can't be, it can complicate the alterations process if you need to shorten one area of the garment or lengthen it or something. And then with the color blocking, sometimes it can change the drape a little bit.
It can.
can.
You usually will get a stiffer product.
Like a
or so-
million
there-
seams or,
you'll lose the drape.
Yeah.
The other thing is your fabric bleeding. Okay,
Uh-huh.
so
Oh,
how are
yeah.
you going to launder this?
Mom, how are you going to launder it?
How are you going to launder it? And you mentioned red.
Uh-huh.
And, red is very unstable.
Red with
Black is very
white.
unstable.
Yeah.
There's some purples that can tend to be unstable because they have a lot of red in them, things like that. So think about this.
Yeah.
And, how are you going to launder it? I would be washing everything in Synthropol because that's how I pre-wash it. Everything in-
Synthropol, in case you didn't hear. Yeah.
So that
Synthropol.
grabs dye out of the water. I would continue maybe to wash it
Oh.
in Synthropol.
Okay.
If
I
so,
hear
if
ya.
I have a garment that I have made with two different fabrics in it, I'm very, very cautious of the dye because dye can become unstable at any time.
And you just never know
Right.
what's going on.
And can you get it out? Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah,
it's
right.
well, and you've put all this time and thoughtfulness into it, and then it's gone.
It is kind of nice to make, in costume land,
Right.
using the polys.
That's one thing about those polys.
The polys
Yes.
tend to not bleed as
Right.
much, so that can be
Right.
nice. Well,
They
and-
also will last through moths and
yeah.
everything else in the
Well,
whole
they're
world.
going to last forever,
Right, right.
They were dinosaurs once.
Right.
So
They will be found along with the shards of pots someplace in a dig.
that I checked out The Golden Thread by Kasia St. Clair, and it's something a lot of people have been reading, and I didn't get to finish it, and of course there's like holds on it, so a lot of people are reading it at the library. Maybe I should request another copy, but she talks about how fabrics, natural fibers, they go away so quickly. We don't have a great record of them like we have of the Bronze Age
Right.
and the Iron Age and all that. And so our history has been really skewed in that way. And that's what the whole book is about. It is just the beginning third that I got to read is just so very interesting. But I think, hey, we got some fabrics that are going to be around a long time now.
Oh, yeah.
Unfortunately, or, however, I don't know.
However you want to look at it.
It is really hard. I just bought some socks. Derek owns these socks. He said, because I said, I need new socks for budgeting, and I don't make my own socks. And he said,
But you could.
I don't know if I'm ever going to have to buy socks ever again in my life. And to
What
me,
are they made out of?
well, I thought, are you just going to wear your sandals forever? Was it?
Because he would if he could.
Yeah. Okay, so the brand is called Darn Tough Socks, and they have
Cute.
a unconditional lifetime guarantee. And he said, I've been wearing these socks for like 5 years. He said, I bought them when we had Zelda.
Yeah.
I needed new socks. And I was like, yeah, you have been wearing those for a long time. Like, I don't do his laundry, but I, see his socks, every once in a while. He's like, they have not worn through it all. Because what I said was, I'd bought a bunch of socks at Marshall's probably several years ago. And I was like, oh my God, all of them are wearing out now at the same time. Like, the bottoms all have holes in them. I need new socks. And so he's like, I don't know what they do to make them so durable, but he's running them. He ran races and stuff. And then they are made of like wool and nylon and whatnot. And I said, well, what about smart wool? Because I've worn through smart wool ones. He's like, nope, I've worn through the smart wool ones, but not these. And I was like, I wonder what
The
it
only problem
is.
I see in that is then when you want new socks.
Yeah, you can't. Well, you can't.
Yeah.
You can't buy too many at once because they are like
they're
$16
really
a pair.
expensive,
However,
They're not $2 socks.
no, they're not $2 socks. However, I thought I got myself I think like 5 pairs. So I have one.
What about those Aldi socks I gave you at Christmas?
Well, actually, they already have a hole in them.
I think they were $1 a
I
pair
wore
or
them.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, and
I've
so
worn mine. Mine don't have a hole in them.
mine do. I don't know, sharp toenails or something. Anyway, okay, so interesting about how long fabrics last. You're welcome for that last
So
tangent.
now I know I can buy you a new pair of socks at Christmas.
You can just
next
buy
year.
me one pair
Right.
of Darn Tough socks And
And
they'll last me
for 16 years.
for my lifetime. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for listening. We really appreciate it. You can get to me, Mallory@SoHere.com, and you can find us on Instagram. We are @SoHereCom. ZD?
So long and so happy.
Thanks for listening to Sewing Out Loud. For even more expert sewing advice, visit sewhere.com.